Null apex pressure A story from the Keth Station incident, as recalled by Elrose Hendricks. Survey grade IV retired. My daughter says I have a stray animal thing. She's said it since she was 9 years old, when I brought home a half-blind river cat from the Corvith survey, and she watched it climb directly onto my lap and go to sleep while three trained veterinary handlers stood outside the door not sure if they should come in. She said it the way kids say things, flat, declarative, like she was reading a fact from a page. Dad has a stray animal thing. After that, she filed me under that category and mostly stopped worrying about it. I thought about her saying that a lot during the 6 days I spent in Veth Station's Block 7. I want to be clear up front. None of what happened was my idea. I'm not a military man. I'm not a xenobiologist or a behaviorist or any kind of specialist. I spent 32 years walking across the surfaces of cold rocks for the Meridian Survey Consortium, taking soil samples and atmospheric readings, and occasionally arguing with my equipment. I'm 67 years old. My left knee makes a sound like a grinding coffee mill when I climb stairs. I have a subscription to a seed catalog, and I grow tomatoes in my kitchen window, and I was on the Meridian's promise, because the consortium asked me to do one more job, one last deep survey on a moon called Threshold Vesh, before I properly retired. We crossed into Keth territorial space by mistake. I want to be very clear about that too, because there was a Senate inquiry later, and I gave my statement, and I'll give it again here. Sensor malfunction, dead reckoning error, 17 minutes into contested space before Captain Osi corrected course. Standard incident. Happens every few years on the frontier. There's a protocol. The Keth boarded us, documented the incursion, and moved us to Veth Station for processing and repatriation. 29 other humans went through that process and were home within the week. I took a bit longer. Block 7 smelled like cold metal, and something underneath it, something warm and animal, a deep musk that I couldn't quite place in the first 2 days. Not unpleasant, exactly. More like standing near a large, sleeping thing and smelling its breath. I lay on the bunk and stared at the ceiling and listened to the station creak and settle and thought about my tomatoes and whether my neighbor Doris had been watering them the way I'd asked. The other 29 were housed in Block 3, which was the standard civilian processing block. I'd been separated from them on arrival, not roughly, not with any explanation, and put in Block 7, which appeared to be a different kind of facility. The cells were larger, the walls were heavier, the doors had extra locking mechanisms. There were no windows, but there was a ventilation system that fed air from somewhere else in the station, and that's where the warm animal smell was coming from. I asked the processing officer, a Keth named Sauce, younger, with the pale scaling around his eyes that meant junior rank in their hierarchy, what Block 7 was usually used for. He told me it was for high-value detainees. I told him I was a retired surveyor on my last contract, and I didn't think that description applied to me. Sauce looked at me for a moment in the particular way that Keth look at things when they're deciding whether to say something. Then he said, "It's not about you." I didn't understand that for another 4 days. On the second day, something changed. I noticed it in the ventilation flow first, a new note in the warm animal smell, something that was less musk and more attention, if attention has a smell and I've been in enough wild places to think it might. Then I heard it, low, resonant, directed, a sound that came up through the floor plating. I'd been sitting on my bunk, reading the consortium field manual on my tablet. I carry it everywhere, force of habit, and I put it down and listened. The sound wasn't continuous. It came in intervals like a pulse, and every time it came from the same direction, the wall to my left. Something on the other side of that wall was making that sound. I sat there for a while and thought about it. Then I went and sat on the floor with my back against the left wall, and my legs stretched out, and I listened. The sound changed when I did that. Still low, still resonant, but the interval shortened, more frequent. The way a sound changes when the thing making it knows it's been heard. I said, "All right, just that. All right." The sound shifted register, not louder, but different in a way I couldn't articulate then and still can't articulate well now. Lower, steadier, like the difference between calling and settling. I went back to the consortium field manual, but I shifted so my back stayed against the left wall. Sauce came by the next morning. He stood outside my cell door for longer than a processing check required, and I could see through the small observation window that he was looking at something, not at me, at something in his peripheral, somewhere up and to the left of where I was sitting. "You talk to it," he said. I said, "All right," I told him. He was quiet for a moment. "You said all right." It seemed like it needed acknowledging. Sauce opened his mouth and then closed it. He had the look of a man rewriting something in his head. Then he said he'd be back, and he was, 3 hours later, with a woman I hadn't met yet. Tall, gray-scaled, with the deep amber eyes that meant senior rank, and the particular flatness of expression that usually means the person looking at you has made decisions that ended badly for other people, and they've made peace with that. Her name was Commander Veth. She introduced herself properly, in the Keth way, which includes rank and function and a statement of intent, a custom I've always liked, because it means you know from the first sentence exactly what you're dealing with. Her intent, understanding. She sat down on the chair the station provided for interrogations, and she looked at me for a long moment with those amber eyes, and then she said, "Tell me about the stray animal thing." I don't know how she knew that phrase, I asked her later. She said it was in my daughter's communications that the station had reviewed during standard processing. My daughter had sent me a message on the day we were boarded, before communications went dark. I know you're going to end up with more weird pets. Dad, you have a stray animal thing. Be careful. Come home. The Keth intelligence apparatus had flagged it. They weren't sure what it meant, but they flagged it because the beasts on Block 7's other side had been behaving in an unprecedented manner since my arrival, and the phrase aligned with the available data. I've thought about this a lot since. The fact that a military-grade alien intelligence service flagged a message from my daughter about my habit of bringing home stray cats. The universe has a sense of humor, and it is terrible. I'll try to explain the thing that Veth wanted to understand, because it took me most of that first conversation to get through it, and she was patient about it in the way that experienced interrogators are patient, not because they're warm, but because patience is a tool. I don't know when it started. As long as I can remember, the things that lived in wild places came to me, and I came to them, and usually nothing bad happened. My mother was the same way. She did wildlife census work on 3 different continents, and her colleagues had a name for it. They called her the Still Center, because animals that would flush from everything else would stay for her. She said it wasn't a skill, it was a quality. She said some people just don't produce the thing that makes wild animals nervous. She couldn't define what that thing was, exactly. Threat signal, maybe. The chemical or behavioral trace of something this wants to eat you, or can. She said, you either have it or you don't, and if you don't, they know. I never had it. Whatever it is that animals read as threat, I don't produce it at a level that registers. I'm not brave about it. I'm not running toward the thing with claws as a matter of courage. It's more that I genuinely don't feel afraid of them, and they read that and come to conclusions about me that are usually favorable. I told all of this to Veth. She listened without taking notes, which meant she was either memorizing it or it was being recorded somewhere, probably both. Then she said, the creature on the other side of that wall is a Keth war beast. Its designation is Warkeeper 40. It was captured in the 4th Territorial Campaign, 23 years ago. It is the oldest living specimen in Keth military custody. It has killed 3 handlers. It has not slept a full rotation cycle in 6 months. She paused until 3 days ago, when it lay down against the interior wall of its enclosure, the wall that faces this cell, and slept for 14 hours. I didn't say anything. You were brought to Block 7, Veth continued, because the standard civilian processing blocks were at capacity. It was an administrative decision. No one expected what happened. How large is it? I asked. 40? She seemed slightly wrong-footed by the question. In your terms, roughly 900 kilograms, 3.4 meters at the shoulder when it stands. Armored head frill, retractable lateral claws, and a secondary jaw structure that hasn't been used in recorded captivity, because the primary jaw structure has been sufficient for everything it has. Encountered. How old? Estimated. Wild-caught adults are difficult to age precisely. The veterinary staff believes 30 to 40 years, which makes it middle-aged for the species. I thought about that. Middle-aged, captured at 20 years old, caged since then, 3 handlers killed, 6 months without real sleep. I said, it must be tired. Veth looked at me. Not just physically, I said. Tired in the way that things get tired when nothing is ever right and they can't fix it and they can't leave. There was a long silence. Veth said, that is not a phrase used in our behavioral documentation. I'm not a behaviorist. It's just what it feels like from the outside. She was quiet for a moment. Then what did you feel when it made contact through the wall? Contact's a strong word. It made a sound, and I acknowledged it. What did you feel? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Recognized, I said, finally. I felt recognized. The way you feel when something in a wild place sees you and makes a decision about you, and the decision is not bad. Not bad for you. Veth stood up. She said she'd be back, and she left. And I listened to 40 breathe through the wall. On the 4th day, they brought in the juveniles. I heard them before I saw them, a different pitch of animal sound, higher and more frequent than 40's deep intervals. And then the cell door opened and two Keth handling officers in full protective gear came in. First, and then two handlers brought the juveniles in on leads. Vorath juveniles. I recognized the species from survey records. Armored reptilian predators, native to the Keth homeworld's equatorial belt, used historically as war mounts, and later as station security due to their spatial loyalty instinct, which meant they bonded to territory rather than person, which the Keth military considered safer than person bonding. These two were juveniles, which in this context meant about 4 years old and around 60 kilograms each, with the armored head frill in early growth, not full-sized yet, but already plated with the overlapping scales that would eventually make mature Vorath heads effectively impenetrable to small arms fire. They were designated 7 and 8 in the station's beast logs. 7 was slightly larger with darker frill scaling. 8 had a scar across the left brow plate from some earlier event. The handling officers positioned themselves against the walls. The handlers released the leads. 7 and 8 stood in the middle of the cell and looked at me. I was sitting on my bunk. I didn't move. I looked back. This part is hard to describe to people who haven't been in that situation. The particular quality of being assessed by something that could hurt you. Most people, in my experience, try to project something. Calm, authority, non-threat. They make a performance of their lack of fear. Animals read performance as performance. What they're looking for, what they've been looking for their whole lives, in every encounter with every other living thing, is the real signal underneath the performance. I didn't perform anything. I was genuinely interested in them. 7 had a particular way of holding its head that suggested the right side of its neck was stiff. Old injury, maybe, or just the early stages of the adult frill weight settling in. 8 was looking at me with the fixed, unwavering attention of something that is still deciding, and the thing it's deciding isn't whether to attack, it's whether to trust. I recognize that look. I've seen it on river cats and ridge wolves and survey world's unnamed things, and once memorably, on a bear analog on a moon called Pyrite that weighed approximately 600 kilograms, and spent 45 minutes deciding whether I was safe before it sat down 5 meters from me and started eating berries. I said, easy. Not a command, not an appeal, just a word that means I know. I see you. Take your time. 7 moved first. The handler in the corner makes a sound, not a word, just a sharp exhalation. And I heard the handling officers shift their weight, and I heard Veth's voice, very quiet, from somewhere I couldn't see. Hold. 7 crossed the cell in 6 steps and pressed its armored flank against my left leg. I put my hand on its frill base. Slowly, no sudden motion. Just the way you lay a hand on anything that's allowed you close. With care, with acknowledgement, with the understanding that being allowed close is a gift, and you don't waste it. The frill base on a juvenile Vorath is the junction between the armored plate and the scaled neck skin, and it's the one place on the animal that the armor doesn't protect. It's warm there. The scales are fine, not the heavy overlapping plates of the frill itself. I ran my thumb along the junction in a slow pass. 7 went still, not the stillness of something tensing, the stillness of something releasing. The difference is in the musculature. You can feel it, the way the whole body readiness that a frightened animal carries all the time just drops, like a weight being set down. 8 came forward and pressed against my right leg. I scratched the same spot on 8, and 8 made a sound, low, resonant, not the same pitch as 40 sounds through the wall, but similar in quality, a settling sound. I looked up. Through the observation window, I could see Veth. She was standing very still with her hands at her sides, and she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read at the time. I read it later, after I understood the situation better. At the time, it just seemed like focused attention. Sauce, behind her, had both hands covering the lower half of his face in the Keth gesture that means witnessing something that should not be possible. We stayed like that for a while. 7 and 8 leaned against me, and I scratched their frill bases, and they made their settling sounds, and the handlers and the handling officers stood very still in the corners of the cell and didn't do anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. Then the alarm started. Not a general alarm, a specific alarm, the kind I would learn later was reserved for containment events. A continuous two-tone pulse, not loud but very insistent, and with it the sound of something moving through the station at a pace and force that I could feel through the floor. One of the handling officers said something to the other in Keth that I didn't understand at the time. Later, a translator gave me the approximate meaning. 40 is loose. They moved toward the cell door. 7 and 8 pressed harder against my legs. Not aggressively, but in the way that animals press when something has alarmed them, and the thing they've decided to trust is the closest available anchor. I kept my hands on their frill bases and said, easy again, and they stayed. The cell door opened. The handling officers went out. The handlers stayed. They were supposed to retrieve 7 and 8, but 7 and 8 were not interested in being retrieved, and the handlers, I think wisely, decided not to force the issue. Veth's voice came over the cell intercom. Mr. Hendricks, please stay calm. There is a containment event on the block. Is anyone hurt? A pause. Not yet. The sound through the floor was getting louder, and then there was another sound, closer, from the direction of Block 7's main corridor, a deep, resonant pulse that I recognized. 40's voice. Not the sleep sounds that had come through the wall. Something more deliberate. Something directed. The containment door at the end of the block corridor opened. I know this from the security log that was produced for the Senate inquiry. Warkeeper 40 broke 3 separate containment locks, each rated for 4 times its observed strength, and moved through 2 sealed internal doors and the Block 7 main corridor at a pace described in the incident report as unhurried and purposeful. Unhurried and purposeful. I like that. It's accurate. The sound of 40 moving through the station was like nothing else I can describe, except, maybe, the deep creaking of a very large ship in a heavy sea. A sound that occupies not just your ears, but your chest cavity, your teeth, the back of your throat. And underneath it, steady as a metronome, that resonant pulse. The door to my cell corridor was sealed. 40 stopped outside it. The pulse came again. 7 and 8 answered it. The same register, lower pitch from either side of me. A call and response. A confirmation of location. Then it was quiet. I sat on my bunk with 2 Vorith juveniles pressed against me and the largest living Keth warbeast outside my door. And I thought about my daughter's message, and I thought, she's going to say I told you so, and she's going to be completely right. Veth's voice came back on the intercom. Mr. Hendricks, still here. 40 is at your cell corridor door. It is not attempting to breach. It is blocking the door. From the outside? From the outside. I thought about that. It's guarding it. Another pause, longer this time. Then, that is consistent with the observed behavior. Is it hurting anyone? The handling team is in an adjacent corridor. They are not attempting to approach. Good. Don't. Mr. Hendricks? We are going to need... Give it time, I said. Give it some time to settle. It's not going to do anything. It just needs to know where I am. There was a very long silence. Then Veth said, we will give it time. The alarms stopped after about 20 minutes. The station, and I could feel this through the structure, the way you feel a held breath released. Relaxed by some degree, the way large, complex systems relax when the thing that was about to go very wrong decides not to. I heard 40 settle outside the door. The sound of 900 kilograms lowering itself to the floor is not subtle. The floor plating transmitted it as a low, sustained vibration. And then, as clear as anything I've heard in my life, I heard the deep, even rhythm of 40's breathing. It was sleeping. 7 had curled up with its head on my left thigh. 8 was sprawled across my feet. The cell was warm with them. I reached over and picked up my tablet and went back at the consortium field manual. Veth came back 3 hours later. She stood at the observation window and looked at the tableau. Me on the bunk, 7 and 8 around me, 40 a large unmovable fact outside the corridor door. And she looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, through the intercom, how did you do this? I didn't do anything, I said. That is not a useful answer. It's an honest one. She was quiet. I could see her hands, where they rested on the ledge below the observation window, flex slightly. You have, she said carefully, destroyed my ability to operate this facility in any normal sense. You understand that. I'm sorry about that. I genuinely am. The War Beast 40 has been in Keth military custody for 23 years. In that time, it has been managed by specialist handlers using protocols developed over 3 durations of Keth beastkeeping. It has killed 3 of those handlers. It has breached containment twice, both times addressed with significant force and significant loss of equipment. It has never in 23 years exhibited bonding behavior. She stopped. Bonding behavior, I repeated. What it is doing outside that door, what the juveniles are doing. This is, in the behavioral literature, this is called apex bond formation. It is the behavior that Vorith and Keth war beasts exhibit when they have identified a pack leader, a recognized apex. It is extraordinarily rare in captive specimens. In most captive specimens, it never occurs at all because the conditions for it. She stopped again. Because the conditions for it require the recognized apex to not be afraid, I said. The amber eyes behind the window went very still. The station briefing on the species, I said. I asked Sauce for it on day 2. I like to know what I'm living next to. You read the behavioral literature. I read the species overview. It mentioned apex bond formation. It said the trigger was complex and not well understood. It is not well understood, Veth said. In 30 years of captive research, the conditions have never been reliably reproduced. The conditions aren't complex, I said. The conditions are just someone who isn't afraid of them. A long pause. You're not afraid of them? No. Why not? I thought about how to say it simply. They weren't going to hurt me. I could tell. You could tell. Her voice had acquired a flatness that I associated by then with Veth processing, something that didn't fit her existing categories. They were scared, I said. 40 especially. Whatever 40 has been carrying around in that enclosure for 23 years, I don't know the full history. I don't know what it went through in the campaign that captured it. I don't know what the first years in custody were like. But when it spoke through that wall, it was scared. Not aggressive scared, quiet scared. The kind of scared that's been going on so long, it's just the baseline. And 7 and 8, they're young, they're in a strange place, the smells are wrong, and the sounds are wrong. And the humans who keep bringing things into their space keep producing the thing that smells like threat even when they're trying not to. And they're scared too. You identified fear. I identified the quality I know how to respond to. It's the same in anything, wild or tame, earth native or otherwise. When something is scared and it reaches towards you anyway, that's a decision. You acknowledge it. Veth looked at me for a very long time. So you said all right, she said finally. I said all right. The doctor and officer's report came later. I was given a copy during the Senate inquiry. I'll quote the relevant section here, because it articulates something I couldn't articulate at the time. The practitioner's response to Vorath juveniles 7 and 8 demonstrated, upon analysis, the application of a zero-threat biological signal across all monitored indicators, pheromone output, microvocal register, respiratory rate, limb pressure modulation. The frill-based contact was conducted at a pressure and duration that engages the Vorath cranial sinus calming reflex, a documented physiological mechanism known but previously unreproducible under field conditions due to the practitioner's inability to suppress threat signal output sufficiently for close contact. Human subject Hendricks demonstrated no detectable threat signal output at any point during the encounter. This is physiologically unusual but not unprecedented in human subjects, however. The magnitude of suppression, effectively zero across all measurable channels, combined with the behavioral fluency of the contact technique suggests either extensive prior experience with large apex predator species or an inherent biological characteristic. The calming response in both juveniles was immediate and sustained. The subsequent behavior of Warkeeper 40 is consistent with full apex bond formation, a behavior not previously observed in this specimen, across 23 years of captivity. The formation trigger mechanism in the Keth warbeast species is less well understood than in the Vorath, but the current evidence strongly suggests that bond formation in both species is contingent on the candidate apex's signal profile being indistinguishable from that of a non-prey, non-threat recognized apex member of the social hierarchy. In lay terms, the beasts categorize the human as an apex because he did not behave like prey and did not produce the signals associated with being afraid of them. This office recommends formalizing the contact protocol observed as designation. Null apex pressure, defined as sustained zero-threat biological signal delivery via frill-based contact in Vorath species, and equivalent calming zone contact in allied species. Note: protocol is only effective when the practitioner's signal output is genuinely absent. Behavioral suppression techniques used by handlers are insufficient substitutes. No countermeasures exist for a practitioner who genuinely lacks the fear signal. The designation has been added to Station Doctrine Annex 7, Section 4. Observed once, practitioner was a human. I stayed in Block 7 for 2 more days, while the administrative machinery processed what had happened and figured out what to do about it. 40 stayed outside the cell corridor door. The handling officers tried twice to redirect it. The first time, 40 turned its head toward them and they decided against it. The second time, they brought in the station's top beast specialist, a Keth woman named Doss, with 40 years of field experience and a record of working with war beasts that had been given to very few practitioners in Keth history. She approached 40 with the correct protocols, the correct pheromone suppressants, the correct approach angle. 40 looked at her, not aggressively, just looked, and then 40 turned its head back toward my cell corridor and didn't move. Doss came to the observation window afterward and looked at me for a while and then said, in good standard, I've been working with this species for 40 years. I know. I said, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. I need you to understand what you've done. She was older, with the deep, settled gravity of someone who has spent their life with very large, dangerous things and made their peace with that. Warkeeper 40 has been in this facility for 23 years. It came in damaged. Not physically, or not only physically. The campaign it was captured in was the 7th Territorial Engagement, and the handling in that campaign was not what our current protocols would permit. I've been monitoring 40 since I arrived at this station 4 years ago. I have been trying every method I know to reach a point where it sleeps through a full cycle. The best I managed was 9 hours. It slept 14, I said. 14 hours and 22 minutes. She paused. What did you say to it? I said, all right. She was quiet for a moment, then, and it heard that as what exactly? What does all right mean to a war beast with 23 years of fear stored? I thought about it. I think it means, I see you. You're not invisible to me. I know you're there and I know what you are and I'm not afraid of what you are and I'm not going anywhere. Doss looked at me for a very long time. Then she said, in 40 years, I have never put it that simply. I'm not a specialist. I said, I recognize a tired thing when I hear one. She was quiet again. Then she said, when the administrative process concludes and you are repatriated, I would like to speak with you further. I would like to understand how you learned to do this. I don't think I learned it, I said. I think it's like my mother said. You either have it or you don't. Perhaps, Doss said. But I think the piece that is trainable is the part where you stop performing calm and start simply being it. And for that, I would like your help. On the 6th day, Veth came back with the repatriation paperwork. She went through it formally, the incursion, the determination of fault, sensor malfunction, no intent, no damages, the terms of release, the standard conditions. All the other crew of the Meridian's Promise had already been processed and returned to the vessel, which was holding at the station's outer approach. Standard procedure. I signed where she indicated. Then she set down the tablet and looked at me. 7 and 8, she said. Yes, their bonding to you this is not something that reverses easily. In the Vorath species, apex bond formation is semi-permanent. When a juvenile bonds, they carry the signal profile of the recognized apex in long-term olfactory memory for the rest of their lives. I understand, 40's situation is more complex. We have never observed full bond formation in a war beast with 40's history. Our behavioral specialists believe that the formation, in this case, may be irreversible. We don't know what 40 would do if you left. I looked at the table between us. I looked at my signed paperwork. I'm guessing 40 isn't small enough to fit through the shuttle airlock, I said. 40 is 900 kilograms and 3.4 meters at the shoulder. Then there might be a logistical problem. Beth's expression did something subtle that I didn't fully understand until the moment she said the next thing. The station shuttle bay has been modified to accommodate large beast transport in the past. The outer doors are rated for, she paused, for large beast transport. I looked at her. Commander Veth. Mr. Hendricks, are you telling me I can take the war beast home? She was quiet for a moment. I am telling you that the logistical challenges, while significant, are not insurmountable if there were the will to surmount them. And is there the will? Very slowly, with the expression of someone who has calculated every variable and arrived at an answer they didn't expect. There is the will. I want to be clear that I did not go into that conversation expecting to leave Veth Station with 2 Vorath juveniles and a 900-kilogram war beast. I want to be equally clear that I have lived 67 years with the stray animal thing, and I have learned that when a thing has decided you are its apex, fighting it is generally more trouble than accepting it gracefully. My daughter is going to be furious. My daughter is also going to help me build an enclosure because she is sensible and practical, and she understands better than most people that when the universe decides something is going to happen, you either work with it or you spend the rest of your life being surprised by it. Veth walked me to the shuttle bay. 7 walked on my left side and 8 walked on my right, and they moved exactly as the handbook on Vorath locomotion describes. Close, flanking, with the outside shoulder angled slightly outward, a protective posture, a formation posture. The formation posture, I would learn later from Doss's follow-up correspondence, is the behavior exhibited by Vorath when escorting their recognized apex through territory they consider potentially hostile. They considered the entire station potentially hostile. They had considered it potentially hostile since they arrived. They were not relaxing that assessment simply because I didn't share it. The handling staff in the corridors did what handling staff do in the presence of something they can't predict. They stood very still and let us pass. We came to the shuttle bay staging area, and I stopped. 40 was there. It had not been led there. It had moved at some point in the previous hour from the Block 7 corridor to the shuttle bay, and it was sitting in the middle of the staging area with the particular settled mass of something that has decided where it is going to be and is not accepting arguments to the contrary. The shuttle bay crew were on the observation platform above. All of them, not in the staging area. 40 turned its head when I came through the door. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. 900 kilograms of armored predator, 23 years of captivity, 3 dead handlers, more fear stored in its body than most living things I've ever encountered, and it turned its head when I came through the door the way a dog turns its head when its person comes home after a long day. Not aggressive, not testing, just, there you are, I've been waiting. I walked across the staging area, and I put my hand on 40's frill base the same way I'd put my hand on 7 and 8's, and I said, all right, and 40 made the deep resonant sound that I'd heard through the cell wall on the second day, and it dropped its head, and I scratched. Above us, on the observation platform, the shuttle bay crew were very quiet. Doss was among them. She'd come to see the transfer through. She told me later that she spent approximately 2 minutes watching me scratch the frill base of a war beast that had killed 3 of her colleagues, and at the end of those 2 minutes, she wrote 3 words in her field notes. It's not complicated. She has since spent the last several years writing a paper about why it isn't complicated and what that means for captive apex predator management across 12 species. I've been a footnote in several sections. I'm genuinely proud of that. The shuttle transfer took 4 hours. There were engineering requirements and safety checks, and a significant amount of documentation, most of which I signed without reading, because the station's administrative team had given up expecting me to push back on anything, and at some point, efficiency took over. 7 and 8 loaded without incident. 40 required a custom transfer platform. It could have walked the boarding ramp, but the ramp rated for 600 kilograms and 40 declined to test the structure's confidence, which was the right call. Veth was there at the airlock when I was ready to board. She gave me the final copy of the repatriation documentation. Then she gave me a second package, the station's complete behavioral file on Warkeeper 40. 23 years of observations, handler reports, veterinary records, incident reports. The full history of everything 40 had been through from the day it was captured. For Doss, she said. She asked me to give this to you for her. I took it. Mr. Hendricks. Veth's expression was the expression of someone doing something that isn't in the protocol. I have been a station commander for 11 years. I have handled 57 significant incidents. Containment breaches, territorial incursions, diplomatic crises. I have never, she stopped. Started again. In 11 years, I have never had an incident that resolved in the way this one has. Most incidents don't involve the Inxer being adopted by the stations. Security beasts, I said. No, they don't. She paused. Is there anything you need for the transit for them? I thought about it. 40's going to want to be near me during the transit. Is there a way to arrange the shuttle configuration so that? Already done, Veth said. I looked at her. You arranged it before asking me what I needed. I've been arranging things for 2 days, she said. I have been working this facility for 11 years. I know how to read a situation and make accommodations. She paused. Even unprecedented ones. I thought about that. Is that what this is? An accommodation? Veth looked at me for a moment, with those amber eyes that had spent 6 days cataloging and assessing and trying to understand something that sat outside her existing frameworks. Then she said, I think it is a recognition. The transit from Veth Station to the Meridian's Promise took 9 hours. 7 slept on my feet. 8 slept on the co-pilot seat, which the shuttle crew took as a personal affront, but eventually accepted as a permanent fact. 40 lay across the modified aft cargo section with its head pointed toward the forward compartment toward me, and it made its settling sounds periodically checking, and I said, all right, periodically, confirming. And we moved through space in this arrangement, and I read the consortium field manual and thought about threshold Vesh, and whether the survey job still needed doing, and whether, practically speaking, a Keth war beast could be brought to the surface of a moon during a geological survey. Captain Osi met me at the Meridian's Promise docking ring. He is a good captain, steady, practical, not given to unnecessary alarm, and he looked at the loading platform where 7 and 8 flanked me, and 40 walked behind me, and he said, very calmly, Elsros, I know, I said, you have a war beast. I have 3 apex predators who have made a decision about me, and I've accepted it. I need a cargo bay configuration and feed requirements for 2 Vorith juveniles and a Keth war beast for the journey home. I'll pay for the freight adjustment out of my retirement package. Osis looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at 40, who was looking at him with the patient, flat attention of a thing that has already decided it can tolerate this person's proximity as long as the person is sensible about it. Is it going to be a problem? O.C. asked. The beast. Is it going to be a problem? Not if the crew doesn't try to provoke it or separate it from me. It's not aggressive. It's just protective. O.C. looked at 40 for another few seconds. Protective, he said. Extremely. He rubbed his face with both hands. Then he said, in the voice of a captain who has accepted that today is going to be logged in the unusual incidents section of his career file, I'll have the cargo bay reconfigured by 1600. Thank you, Captain. Your daughter called, by the way, while you were on the station. She called the ship directly. She said, he consulted his tablet. She said, and I'm quoting, tell my father that whatever weird thing has happened, I told him so, and also that I love him, and also that if it needs to stay in the kitchen, I am drawing a line about the kitchen. I thought about 40 in my kitchen. I thought about the seed catalog and the tomatoes. Tell her I love her too, I said, and that the kitchen line seems reasonable. We'll negotiate. I've been asked, since the Senate inquiry made the incident public, to explain what the Keth Station incident means, what it says about human-predator interaction, what it says about the nature of apex recognition, what it says, in a broader sense, about what humans are. I'm not the right person to answer most of those questions. Doss answers them better than I do. The behavioral literature has expanded considerably in the years since, and there are people with the training and the language to do it justice. I recommend Doss's paper, which is titled, in the dry way that behavioral papers are titled, Apes Bond Formation Across Multiple Predatory Species, a case study in zero-threat signal presentation and its applications in captive management, and which contains in its third section a footnote that reads, the practitioner described in this case study, when asked to explain his technique, said, I just didn't want them to be scared anymore. This observation, while colloquial, is more precise than any formal description this researcher has produced in 40 years of fieldwork. I'm proud of that footnote, too. What I can say, what I know from 67 years of the stray animal thing, from river cats and ridge wolves and bear analogs on survey moons and 2 Vorath juveniles and a war beast named 40, is this. The things that live in wild places are afraid most of the time. All of them. The ones that are big enough to eat you are afraid too, and sometimes they're afraid more than the small ones. Because being the top of the food chain doesn't stop the world from being large and strange and unpredictable. What most frightened things do, when they can't leave and they can't fight, is wait. They wait for something to change. They wait for something to be different. They wait for something that will acknowledge them without needing them to be less than what they are. Most of the time, that thing never comes. Most of the time, they're still waiting when they die. 40 waited 23 years. 7 and 8 waited 4. And I walked through a cell door, and I said, all right, and I scratched behind their frills, and they stopped waiting. That's all it was. That's all it is. My daughter says it's the stray animal thing. I think she's right. But I also think it isn't unique to me, or to my mother, or to whatever combination of biology and temperament made us the way we are. I think it's a human thing. I think most of us have it, in some form, at some depth. I think we're the kind of species that looks at a frightened thing and wants to fix it. I think we have been doing that since long before we had the words for it, on worlds we don't remember now, in relationships that never got written down. And I think the beasts know it. I think they've always known it. I think that's what they're reading when they look at us, when they make their settling sounds and press against our legs and lie down outside our doors. They're reading that specific quality that is, maybe, the most human thing about us. We notice when something is scared, and we try to help. That's the HFI that no one writes the battle poems about. No generals, no weapons, no glorious charge into the guns of the enemy. Just an old man on a bunk with his tablet and 2 juvenile Varaths and a 900-kilogram warbeast who'd been waiting 23 years for someone to say, all right, I said it. They heard it. The rest is just paperwork. 40 Lives is in a modified agricultural enclosure on the half-acre behind my house. The consortium helped with the construction. They were, to put it mildly, extremely interested in the full story once the Senate inquiry made it public, and their interest expressed itself in engineering resources. The enclosure is rated for 1,200 kilograms and 3.5 meters at the shoulder and has a heating system that 40 operates via a pressure pad, which it worked out in the first week and has been using efficiently since. 7 and 8 are in a smaller enclosure adjacent to 40's. They're full grown now. The frill plates have come in completely, and 8's scar is half hidden under the new scaling. They're bigger than the pictures in the survey manual, a lot bigger. They are, by any reasonable measure, terrifying. My neighbor Doris has named them Ted and Frank. She brings them vegetables from her garden. They accept this. I've decided not to examine this too carefully. My daughter visits on alternate Sundays. She sits on the fence of 40's enclosure with her coffee, and she talks to it, and 40 sits about 6 meters away and listens and makes occasional sounds that I believe are responses. They have a relationship that does not require my involvement. I find this very satisfying. She says every time she comes, "You knew this was going to happen." I tell her I didn't know anything. She gives me the look that means she's filing this under things. Dad says that aren't quite true. She's not wrong. I grew up with the stray animal thing. I spent 67 years watching it play out across a dozen worlds and 4 dozen species. I have never, in all that time, met a frightened thing that didn't want to stop being frightened, given any kind of option. I'm glad I was the option. I'm glad they heard me.
All right.
Classified Internal Document, Veth Station Doctrine Annex, Section 4, Edition Date. 14th Day, third cycle following the Block 7 incident designation. Null apex pressure definition. The sustained delivery of zero-threat biological signal across all measurable channels including pheromone output, microvocal register, respiratory rate, and contact pressure modulation to an apex-class predator via species-appropriate calming zone contact, frill base and Vorath, dorsal crest base and Keth warbeasts, equivalent anatomical sites and related species. Effect, engages species-specific cranial sinus calming reflex. Triggers apex bond formation in susceptible specimens. Observed to resolve chronic fear state arousal in long-term captive specimens where standard handler protocols have failed. Precalates. Practitioner must demonstrate genuine absence of threat signal, not behavioral suppression. Standard suppression protocols are insufficient substitutes. No countermeasures or training protocols for simulating genuine signal absence have been identified at time of writing. Occurrence. Observed once in controlled conditions. Practitioner was a human. Note from DOS. Station Chief Beast Specialist. I have spent 40 years in this field. The correct designation for what the human did is not a technique. The correct designation is, he saw what they needed. The name we have given it is our way of pretending we understand it well enough to put it in a manual. We do not. We are still learning. End document. Elrose Hendricks, Survey Grade IV, retired, gave his account of the Block 7 incident before the Joint Colonial Keth Relations Committee in the third year following the event. He was accompanied to the hearing by 2 juvenile Vorath in full adult growth. He declined the committee's offer of a commendation on the grounds that he had not done anything worth commending, which the committee chair noted for the record and then commended him for anyway. He currently grows tomatoes in his kitchen window and considers himself retired.